Tonight on the Worldview Report, a professor of international relations at Pusan National University writes for 1945 and declares that Iran has written the exact military playbook that China will use against the U.S. Navy in a conflict with China over Taiwan. Martin Armstrong's latest analysis on Armstrong economics, it documents that Taiwan has already concluded that America cannot protect it, and thus they are building a drone army of 200,000 aerial systems and 1,000 unmanned surface vessels, all by the year 2030. The International Energy Agency more than doubles its global oil deficit forecast for this quarter to 1.8 million barrels per day, calling it the deepest quarterly deficit since 2021, and saying that the global oil inventories have fallen 410 million barrels since the Iran war began. And the Trump administration, they finalized a rule ending Medicaid and CHIP funding for puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and surgical sex change procedures for minors, with HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. declaring the federal government will no longer use taxpayer dollars to fund procedures that carry serious risks and cause irreversible harm to children. And the Jerusalem Post, they report that Israel has quietly resumed preemptive airstrikes on Hamas terror cells in Gaza. That's after a weeks-long pause that was required by Trump's July disarmament deal. And in tonight's commentary, I'll blow away the myth that there were folks and children, starving in Gaza. Even the United Nations now admits that's not the case. All that and more as the Worldview Report begins right now.
This is Worldview Report with host Brandon House. Whether it is news from the nation's capital or your state capital, from the classroom to the boardroom, from national security to national and local news that impacts you and your family, Worldview Report is your trusted source for vital and uncensored news. And now, here is Brandon House.
Good evening and welcome to the Worldview Report. I'm Brandon House. We begin tonight with an analysis from 1945. It's written by Dr. Robert E. Kelly, and it is one of the most sobering strategic assessments published about the Iran war's long-term implications. Kelly's central thesis is this: China, they have been watching the Iran war as a live laboratory, and what it has learned will shape the next great military confrontation in human history. Iran, they have demonstrated that a mid-sized power with limited resources can effectively deny the United States Navy access to an entire strategic waterway using cheap drones, naval mines, anti-ship missiles, and asymmetric harassment of commercial shipping. The U.S., despite its enormous technology and financial advantages, has been unable to force a decisive outcome after months of airstrikes. Kelly, he writes that the proximate cause is Trump's unwillingness to invade Iran on the ground. And then you combine that with depletion of U.S. precision missile stockpiles that have reduced American air options after months of indecisive strikes. Of course, many people are not for troops on the ground, including myself. But Kelly, he argues, almost certainly China will copy the Iranian playbook, using cheap, automated, and lots of air and sea assets. And Beijing will attempt to drive back or sink America's large, slow surface fleet if indeed a Taiwan conflict erupts. China's ability to execute this strategy, it will be in the order of magnitudes better than Iran's, with vastly greater resources, including industrial capacity and military sophistication. The critical strategy lesson is this: the U.S. has burned through ATACMS, PRSM Tomahawk cruise missiles, Patriot and THAAD interceptors, at rates that compromise readiness for a Pacific conflict. The Iran war was, in Kelly's words, an unwinnable and unnecessary conflict. The waste of exquisite assets in the Persian Gulf, well, it has demonstrated just how unprepared America is to fight the cheap drone warfare that it will face in the Pacific, while simultaneously signaling to China, South Korea, and Japan that American resolve and capability may not be what they once assumed. We'll keep track of this developing story, of course. Our next story, it comes from Armstrong Economics, written by legendary economic forecaster Martin Armstrong. And it is the most comprehensive single analysis of the Taiwan threat scenario published this week. Taiwan, they are preparing for a war that Washington pretends it can handle. Taipei, they have partnered with Atarian. That's the American-German drone software company whose systems have been battle-tested in Ukraine. And they're building a military posture deliberately modeled on Ukraine's survival strategy. Taiwan has introduced 2 domestically produced medium-range attack drones in its latest exercises. And they integrated them with fast missile boats, special forces, and Coast Guard vessels. It's also considering between $210 billion and $240 billion for surveillance and attack drones through the year 2031. And they aim to produce 100,000 drones per month by the year 2030, with plans to expand its anti-ship missile arsenal beyond 1,800 weapons by early 2029. Armstrong then delivers the strategic reality that Washington is not telling the American people. CSIS, they ran 24 simulations of a Chinese invasion. The United States and its allies, they usually prevented China from occupying Taiwan. But the victory was horrific. Dozens of ships sunk, hundreds of aircraft destroyed, thousands of troops killed. Normally, 2 aircraft carriers lost within weeks. A victory that leaves carriers at the bottom of the Pacific and Taiwan's economy devastated. Well, that is not the clean triumph that politicians will sell. Another CSIS assessment, it found that the U.S. could exhaust some critical long-range precision-guided munitions within the first week of a Taiwan conflict. 1 week. The U.S. has already burned through most of the same munitions fighting Iran. Armstrong's war cycle model, it identified 2026 as a panic cycle with a critical Taiwan-China convergence period that builds toward 2029. Every element of that cycle is now in motion. The Middle East, it has erupted. Ukraine has spread into Russia, and Europe is militarizing. And then you add in Japan. Japan is abandoning post-war restraints, and Taiwan is transforming itself into a heavy armed island fortress. And again, another story we'll keep our eye on. Our next story comes from the International Energy Agency's August monthly oil market report. It's reported by MSN, Oil Price, Zero Hedge, Bloomberg, and Seek Alpha. And it contains data that every American who drives, heats their home, or buys groceries needs to understand. The IEA, they slashed their 2026 global oil supply forecast on Wednesday, cutting it by 4.3 million barrels per day on the year, as the failure to reopen the Strait of Hormuz pushes the world deeper into a supply crisis. That is significantly worse than the 3.7 million barrels per day decline the agency projected just last month. And it leaves global supply at 102.02 million barrels per day. That's the IEA's lowest 2026 forecast yet. And for the year as a whole, supply, it is expected to fall 1.27 million barrels per day short of demand. The squeeze, it's even worse this quarter. The IEA now expects a 1.8 million barrel per day deficit between July and September, more than double the 800,000 barrels per day shortfall that it estimated just last month. That is the deepest quarterly oil deficit since the fourth quarter of 2021. Middle East oil production, it remains 8.3 million barrels per day below pre-war levels. Gulf loadings briefly touched 20 million barrels per day in early July as temporary ceasefire held. And then it fell back to 12 million barrels per day as the fighting resumed. The supply stockpile is also destroying demand. The IEA now expects global oil consumption to contract by 1.6 million barrels per day in 2026, a steeper drop than the 1 million barrels per day decline it projected in July, as high prices and restricted fuel supplies forced consumers to cut consumption, particularly in Asia and the Middle East. Global oil inventories, they have fallen by 410 million barrels since the Iran war began. The IEA, they do project a 4.61 million barrels per day surplus, but not until 2027, and only if Middle East hostilities de-escalate. That's an assumption that looks increasingly optimistic at this point. We'll be right back after this short break. Friends, this is Brandon House. For more than a year now, I've been teaching through the book of Revelation, and the response from you has been overwhelming. You've asked me again and again, when are you going to put this study in print? We want to mark it up. We want to share it with our families. Well, it's here. My brand new 2-volume commentary on the book of Revelation, verse by verse, chapter by chapter. This is not a watered down, allegorized replacement theology approach to Revelation. This is a literal, grammatical, historical study, the way the Lord intended his word to be read. And I connect the prophecy of Revelation to the headlines you're watching unfold right now, the rise of global government and the convergence of end-time events the Lord Jesus warned us about. Folks, we are living in serious days, and there has never been a more important time to understand what God has told us about what is coming. Get your 2-volume Revelation commentary today at worldviewstore.com. That's worldviewstore.com.
News is moving faster than ever, and so are we. Worldview Tube brings you 24/7 live stream coverage and now real-time alerts when it matters most. Once you have the Worldview Tube app installed, exit the app and navigate your way to Settings. In Settings, locate the tab labeled Notifications. Select the Notifications tab. Scroll down until you locate the Worldview Tube app icon. Select the tab, and here you can turn on and customize your notification experience for the Worldview Tube app. News doesn't wait, and neither should you. Turn on push notifications to stay informed. Every headline as it happens.
Welcome back from the break. Thanks for being with us tonight and every night. Our national conference is coming up Friday night, October 23rd, Saturday, October 24th. It'll be held just outside of Milwaukee at the Waukesha Expo Center. Remember, after 22 years of holding a national conference, we're making it free for the first time. We'll take an offering to try to offset cost. But if you would like to be in the building for these speakers who are there live in person, you can get a ticket. You can reserve a seat by going to worldviewtube.com/events, worldviewtube.com/events. We have over 800 seats now gone. So hope you can join us in person. I'm also bringing my mini grand piano and piano player. And we'll have a lot of great music as we sing together some of the great classic sacred hymns. So it's going to be a great weekend of fellowship together, Bible teaching, and, well, worship, singing some of the great hymns. You're going to want to be there. It's going to be kind of like going back a few decades, I think. My commentaries on the book of Revelation, they're coming out this fall. We already have now close to 500 sets that have been ordered, pre-ordered. So if you would like to get a set and be guaranteed a set by this fall, I would urge you to check out worldviewstore.com, worldviewstore.com. Again, it's a pre-order, and the Volume 1, Volume 2 are at the printer. Volume 3 goes later this week. And again, we're being told we'll have them by this fall, and we'll start shipping. We are probably going to run out of the first press run pretty quick. which means then we have to wait around another 5 to 6 weeks for a reprint. So if you want to be guaranteed a copy by this fall, if you'd like to give them as Christmas gifts, then I would urge you to go ahead and check out how to do a pre-order of that commentary set now. Worldviewstore.com, worldviewstore.com. And again, remember our foundation, won't you? Worldviewfoundation.com. We are a listener-supported network. We push out lots and lots of programming absolutely free. And if you appreciate our worldwide ministry, we appreciate your support. Worldviewfoundation.com, worldviewfoundation.com. You also find our mailing address there if you prefer to support us through the mail. And while you're there, check out Would You Legacy Giving, how to remember our foundation in your estate planning. We probably have 12 to 15 families that have done that. So thank you to those folks. If you'd like to leave a biblical worldview legacy, and why would you not? And I think after our 36 years, we've proven we have a track record. We're going to stay the course. So if you would like to invest in Christian worldview programming going worldwide as a ministry, then please consider us in your estate planning. You can go to worldviewfoundation.com to find out about legacy giving. Worldviewfoundation.com. Thank you. Our next story comes from LifeSite News, and it's confirmed by the Washington Post, and it covers a landmark policy decision that the Trump administration announced on Tuesday. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, they finalized a rule on Tuesday prohibiting Medicaid and the Children's Health Insurance Program from funding puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and surgical sex change procedures for minors. The rule takes effect on October 13th of this year, 2026, with a 6-month transition period for minors who are currently receiving hormone treatments. Mental health services for gender dysphoria will continue to be covered. States, they may use their own funds to cover these procedures, but federal tax dollars will no longer pay for them. HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. announced the rule, stating, "Today, we are ending federal taxpayer funding for sex-rejecting procedures on children. These interventions carry serious risk and can cause irreversible harm. The federal government will no longer use Medicaid and CHIP dollars to fund procedures that fail to meet the evidentiary standard that our children deserve." That's what he said. And good for him and good for the administration. CMS Administrator Dr. Oz, he added, "Children deserve our protection, not experimental interventions that pose serious risks and convey no proven benefits. By cutting off federal funds for these sex-rejecting procedures, we're following the science, saving taxpayer dollars, and most importantly, protecting children from potentially irreversible harm." President Trump personally posted on Truth Social saying Medicaid will no longer fund gender transition surgeries or hormones for minors. And he added that dozens of U.S. hospitals have already ended gender-affirming care under administration pressure. 17 states currently cover some degree of these procedures for minors under Medicaid. Democratic state attorneys general, they are preparing legal challenges. The rule is expected to face immediate litigation. Our final story tonight comes from the Jerusalem Post, and it's written by Yana Jeremy Bob. And it covers a significant and carefully documented shift in how Israel is operating in Gaza under the constraints of Trump's July Hamas disarmament deal. The Israeli Air Force, they struck a Hamas terror cell on Thursday, the second preemptive strike in 2 consecutive days, and the first such strike since the late July deal regarding partial Hamas disarmament, all in exchange for partial IDF withdrawals from Gaza. After the July deal took effect, the U.S. essentially instructed Israel to stop attacking Gaza. And Prime Minister Netanyahu, well, he complied. For several weeks, the IDF's activities in Gaza were limited to shooting Hamas fighters who directly approached the Israeli-controlled border area. But Wednesday's strike and Thursday's follow-up, well, they both mark a new posture. IDF sources, they told the Post that Wednesday's target was a Hamas terror cell commander in northern Gaza, who was nowhere near the border and presented no immediate threat. He was killed because he was planning to order or carry out future attacks. The IDF said it is still not targeting Hamas members for their role in the October 7th massacre or for their strategic value, but they are taking preemptive action against operatives that it knows are actively moving toward an attack. The analysis by the Post suggests the resumption of preemptive strikes carries a deliberate diplomatic message. The July deal stipulated that Hamas was to begin partially handing over weapons within 2 weeks. Hamas, they have not done so. The airstrikes by Israel, they may indeed signal that they are not going to be involved in unlimited restraint, and that failure to comply with the disarmament timeline will have consequences. Separately, the IDF, they issued a statement on Wednesday saying that Hamas had apparently considered staging a large-scale military drill inside Gaza, which Israel had made clear was out of bounds. The drill never materialized, but the airstrike, it could also be Israel's response to the attempt. And again, this is a fluid story we'll continue to follow. Well, now it is time for our nightly Worldview Report commentary. I want to talk to you tonight about a number, one number. And I want you to understand where that number came from, because that is the whole story. The number is 1/2 of 1%. 1/2 of 1%. That's the rate of acute malnutrition among children under 5 years old in the Gaza Strip. And that's according to a nutrition survey published on the 22nd of July. Now, who conducted that study? Who conducted the survey? Was it the Israeli government? Was it some think tank back in Washington, D.C.? Nope. It was conducted by the Nutrition Cluster. That's the body led by UNICEF, the United Nations Children's Fund. They used World Health Organization methodology. They measured the children's weight, their height, the circumference of their arms. This is the United Nations, folks, grading its own paper. The grade came back and did not say what they have been saying and telling, well, a lot of us around the world for 2 solid years. Now, let me put that number next to some other numbers so that you can understand what it is we're looking at. According to figures that were compiled by UN Watch, the acute child malnutrition rate in the United Kingdom is 0.4 of 1%. In Germany, 1/2 of 1%. Gaza, it came in at 1/2 of 1% as well. Finland is higher. Egypt is higher. Iran is higher. Syria is higher by a factor of more than 20. And here's the point I want you to hear. The United Nations, they have formally published standards for declaring what a famine is. It's called the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification. And in order to declare a Phase 5 famine, that system requires that 30% of children under the age of 5 show acute malnutrition. 30%. The survey, it found 1/2 of 1%. Folks, that is not a rounding error. That is not a close call, is it? This is not a disagreement among experts at all. That is off by a factor of 60. And now watch what happened next. Because the World Food Program, the same United Nations organization at the center of this whole thing, is right now asking the world for $426 million to continue operating in Gaza. Since October of 2023, the United Nations, they've demanded roughly $2.75 billion for Palestinian territories. That's billion with a B. And where did that money come from? It came out of your paycheck. It came out of the paycheck of a man living in Tennessee working 2 jobs who's trying to, figure out how to pay for groceries that cost 30% more than they did 4 years ago. Now, I want to tell you something that ought to make every one of us stop and think. There is a nation called Papua New Guinea. You'll not see it on the evening news. There are no campus protests about Papua New Guinea. There are no celebrities that I know of wearing pins about Papua New Guinea. And in that nation, according to a report released in June, nearly 48% of children under the age of 5 suffer from chronic stunting from long-term nutritional deficiencies. Almost half, more than double the global average. The World Food Program, they don't even have a permanent office there in Papua New Guinea. So ask yourself this question. If this were about hungry children, where would the money go? It would go to where the hungry children are, right? It didn't go there. It went where the cameras were. It went where the political usefulness was. Folks, this is why we teach you to think biblically instead of emotionally. This is why we say you need Worldview Tube. You need the Worldview Report to put out news and information that's factual and true, so you're not manipulated by lies and emotion. Thankfully, somebody finally checked. And guess what? It was the United Nations that checked. Odd, right? But their own numbers, they came back and they contradicted their own narrative. Now, I'm not telling you tonight that no one in Gaza has gone hungry during this war. War indeed produces suffering. And I grieve over the suffering of children anywhere on the planet. What I am telling you is that specific, catastrophic headline claims that were used to, indict a nation and to extract billions of dollars is not what the measuring tape found when the measuring tape finally showed up. So here's another lie. Israel is starving the children of Gaza. Wrong. Now you have the facts. That does it for this edition of the Worldview Report. Thank you for supporting us at worldviewfoundation.com, worldviewfoundation.com. And by the way, each and every night you'll find my commentaries as an article. You say, I'd love to have that in print to share with friends. Where could I find it? Well, as I said, again, every one of my commentaries, it's put into print at worldviewtimes.com. So worldviewtimes.com. Till next time, I'm Brandon House. May God save America. Take care.